We're delighted to have Chief Karen Brack here. I found it ironic, you started your job as the new fire chief on August 6th.
Yes.
That was my 60th birthday, so there's some karma there,
There
okay?
is.
There's some real karma there.
Is.
Of course, she's been all over the news. I had the great honor of hearing Karen speak twice within the course of about a week, and I was just intrigued with her story. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say gender's not important, but for us, I think it's important that in a city like Charleston, the powers that be chose the most qualified candidate for this job, and it happened to be a woman.
Thank you.
And I think that that's a big step forward for our city government. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Where were you born?
Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, okay.
Blasphemy, Jacksonville.
That's okay. That's
Okay.
all right. So where'd you
6
grow
months.
up?
6 months.
Okay. So you grew up in Savannah?
I grew up in Savannah. Mm-hmm.
And what was that like?
Hot, humid, marshy.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I remember most about Savannah is one of the things that helps me here, and it's the smell. My favorite childhood memory, my absolute favorite childhood memory, is that my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, lived on the marshes. And so when Savannah, in Thunderbolt, Georgia, which is right outside, so we would go on the weekends, we would go and spend the weekends with my grandparents. And we would sleep out on the porch on day beds, and you know, it's just such a distinctive smell, and I think that's it, is that when I come back home, that's what brings me back. And I think that's important for us, because we always have to recenter. We always have to come back to center. And so being back in Charleston, it reminds me of...
It's a coming home of sorts.
It reminds me of that, yeah.
What were your parents like? What did they do?
My parents were, my father worked for the railroad.
Okay.
My mother stayed at home. Sort of a very disruptive childhood, so that's so we're not going to go into that whole lot.
All right, we don't have to go into that.
Very,
what about siblings?
Eight of us. There were five boys, 3 girls.
So being in a male-dominated environment wasn't unusual?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No.
So I love
Five
that.
boys, yes.
So did you ever get into trouble as a child? What was the worst thing you did?
I was a juvenile delinquent.
Oh no, I don't believe that.
This is the truth, right? We're telling the truth here.
That's all right.
Okay, so
That's okay.
I'm going to tell the truth.
All right.
I was a juvenile delinquent. I had no structure as a child, and so when at about 14, I got sent to a boarding school because I was a handful. There was the family stuff, pretty dysfunctional family, but I got sent to boarding school because I was a hellion.
Is there a good memory from your childhood you'd like to share?
I told you
Did the boarding school have bars? I mean, you know, was it a uniform sort of situation?
No, it did not.
Okay, all right, we'll move beyond childhood.
Yeah, but
most of us have.
No, here's the important thing. It gave me structure.
Okay, right.
It gave me structure.
And now you're in an extremely structured
environment.
And have been for many years.
Yeah, you wonder how I got there, don't you?
No, I think it makes sense, and you're going to help us figure that out.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a nickname?
Sweetie Pie.
Isn't there a reality show on right now that features a small child who enters beauty pageants? Who's Honey Boo Boo? Sorry. Oh,
no,
sorry.
Sweetie Pie is a cook. It's a restaurant
that's right.
in
That's
St.
right.
Louis, Missouri.
Okay.
And I went there on the way when I was traveling back across America. It was awesome.
That's fantastic.
Great food. Yeah.
So while you were in boarding school, what
Yes.
did you think you were going to do when you grew up?
I was going to be a botanist.
Really?
Yes, I was going to be a naturalist. I was going to be a botanist. I was going to do something outside.
Did you enjoy school?
I was blessed because I was read to a lot as a child, and so I wasn't. I think I was a little bit maybe. That helped me. That helped me with school. I didn't have to work very hard. I didn't work very hard. I was never an overachiever. I'm still not an overachiever. And I think that's important to recognize, is that I am not an overachiever. I'm actually sort of a type B personality, which a lot of people would think that I would have to be a type A. I'm not. I'm pretty laid back. She's taking notes.
That's all right, but you can tell her.
wait a
we
minute,
have
she's
agreed.
taking
No, I
notes.
want everybody to know because Melanie is here, and we've agreed that Karen can be completely truthful, and if there are things that she would like off the record, you would honor that. So I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah. So I learned through reading, and I was actually it came sort of naturally. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were there any particular teachers who had a strong influence?
Yes, there was when I was in boarding school. I developed a very strong relationship with my math teacher, and after I got out of high school, I went and lived with her and her family.
Wow.
They were remarkable Christians, and they took me in. I've got two more brothers, in addition to my biological. They have two sons, and I will end up living in close proximity to them.
That's great.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting you had the math and the science thing going.
Yeah.
You know, we hear a lot about STEM, right? That's the whole science, technology, whatever, engineering and math.
Right.
And, you know, we're sort of the same generation. You know, back at that time, I don't think a lot of girls were encouraged,
Right.
you know, to head that way. So after high school, what'd you do?
I went to college. I worked for a little bit. I worked for about 6 months. I did some, probably had some jobs that nobody else here had. I worked in a mill for a while, a textile mill.
Okay.
And to make money to go to school. I worked when I was in high school. That was one of the things about the boarding school I was at, was that you had to have a job. And so everybody worked.
What'd you do?
I cleaned dorms, I did yard work, it was whatever, you got assigned.
Right.
Different things to make the school function. So I worked in a textile mill for a while. When I went to college, I worked in the library, I worked with restaurants as a waitress.
So you put yourself through school?
Yes, I did.
And where'd you go?
North Georgia College in Dahlonega, Georgia.
And you majored in?
Biology.
Fire biology.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get there. It's a quantum leap, but we're going to get there. We're going to get there at some point. So while you were in college...
You're boring them.
No, I'm not. Do you? I mean, this is interesting. Come on. Everybody starts in a different place and, you know, has a different story, and we all benefit from that. All right, so you're in college. You're studying biology.
I was on the 5-year plan, too.
Oh, okay. That's all right. Well, you were putting yourself through. Come on. Give yourself a break.
All right.
You know, you can't take a full load and work full time. Well, maybe you can. I couldn't do it. So how did you first even get introduced to firework?
After I was out of college, I went back to the Atlanta, Georgia area, and I went to work I did a couple of things. I went to work for the state parks, for the Georgia State Parks, as a naturalist for a while. So I did that for a little bit, thinking that was my calling. That didn't work. So then I went to Fish and Game for a little bit, thinking that was my calling. I did not like the gun thing at all. That didn't do anything for me, even though I really enjoyed the people I worked with there. So then I went to the Georgia Department of Transportation, and there I stayed for probably a year and a half, maybe. I worked writing environmental impact statements. So anytime you take a highway through anywhere, you have to do. Susan's over there going, yeah. You have to do. You have all the federal regulations about what you can and cannot disturb. So I was doing the biological surveys for that, and that just wasn't. It was not very satisfying. I ended up in an office most of the time, and I wasn't happy with that. So I thought I'd go back to school and work on my master's. So I went back to Georgia State because I was in Atlanta. I went back to Georgia State University, and I was going to work on. This is more of Karen can't decide what she's going to do with life. So I worked on for a little bit exercise physiology, and then I worked on a little bit of the biology, the botany. I decided I was going to be a horticulturalist or some other. And while I was in school, I was working my way through school, and so while I was in school, I kept trying to think of a more productive way to finance my education. Because it was going to school trying to keep an 8-to-5 job was a little bit difficult, and so I started looking for some alternatives. And one of the alternatives I thought about was, you know what, I think I'll go and ride an ambulance. It seems like it might be kind of fun, because I had some of the the human anatomy, physiology. I figured it'd be easy enough, and so I started making some phone calls because in order to do that, you have to be an EMT of some level, an emergency medical technician of some level. And so I started making the phone calls about how do I become an EMT. And one of the phone calls I made was to the Fulton County Fire Department, because they were the people that taught the EMT class, and that was who I needed to contact. So I called Fulton County Fire Department, and I got this gentleman named Danny Bowman. He was an assistant chief there. And so Chief Bowman and I had a conversation about, well, we really don't do that, Karen. We don't take people off the street and just teach them to be EMTs. It's like, but why not? It's me.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Yeah, but for me, you'll do it, right? So in the conversation, though, he started asking me some questions about what I wanted to do or why I was interested in that. And one of the questions he asked me was, have you ever thought about the fire department? I was like, nope, never have. Thank you. Talk to you later. Have a nice day.
Out of here, right?
Yeah. No, yeah. So it was probably one of the. I feel like sometimes I've been incredibly lucky, and because I have had, for all of the bad things that you may have, it's the great things that happen to you, and that was just a stroke of luck. It was not a plan. It was hey, you know what? Maybe I'll call that guy back. And so we agreed before we hung up. It wasn't that much of a shut off, but we agreed before we hung up. That I'd think about it and I'd look into it a little bit and see if I had any interest.
And then what happened?
Well, the rest is history.
But you started part-time.
No, not with that.
Oh,
no,
okay.
No, when I went full-fledged. I was, so they had, Fulton County was it was an offshoot of the city of Atlanta. And what had happened was the city of Atlanta had decided that it was going to take everything but the core metro area and parse it out to other fire departments. And so one of the chiefs that was in the city of Atlanta went out and formed Fulton County Fire Department. So I started in Fulton County in 1982. There was one woman that was already in the department at that point in time. She had come in 1981. And I started recruit class. There were 28 people in my recruit class, and it was myself and another woman, Pam Andrews.
You were the only two in the class?
We're the only two in the class. And so it was an interesting experience, but that was it was a full-time job. And
were you training to be a firefighter?
I was training to be a firefighter. Had nothing to do with EMTs.
Mm-hmm.
Had absolutely nothing to do with the emergency medical part. So it was a strict. You come on, see if this works for you. If it does, a little bit later on, we'll send you through EMT school. So it was something different to do. I think that was it. I think that was what appealed to me was, I can do this.
But
I can do this.
Doesn't a firefighter have to have a certain amount of just physical strength?
Well, I'm not exactly a shrinking violet.
Well, but this was 1981, 82. No,
Oh,
I mean,
I've always
you
been
have
healthy.
to think about
I'm
that.
healthy, yeah.
Yeah, but still, I
Big
mean,
bones.
you're talking carrying around hoses and being able to jump off,
Yeah.
ladders and do
Right.
all, I'm thinking of those terrible movies. I'm sorry, the reality of
you go through the self-deprecation piece of it is that I've always been stronger with my back than my brain. I'm a strong, physically strong person, and that's a blessing. Believe me, I'm good with that. I'm not that's not a bad thing. I have always worked really hard, and physically worked really hard. And I've always been very strong. I mean, you grow up with 5 brothers. You play sports with 5 brothers. I beat up one of them on a regular basis.
Okay, good.
So it was I was the champion.
So I'm curious, did Chief Bowman did he continue to support you?
Yes, he did. He did.
Was he a mentor?
To this day, he supports me. Yes.
Tell us about him.
He's a politician.
Okay.
Is what he is. He is a great politician, but he has this remarkable knack for remembering everything and everybody. Very polished man, very astute about everything that's going on in government, and so he was. he sort of paved the way. But he actually, I'll tell you, I don't want to give him undeserved credit.
Okay.
He paved the way as far as making the job
Right. appear
to be, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe how wonderful it is to fight a fire, and you know, it's the best ever. And I actually, the first day I walked in the door of from recruit school. So you go through recruit school for, it varies. I think we were 12 weeks at that point in time. So you walk in the door, and the first person that I actually worked for was a guy named Robert Gates.
Okay.
Robert Gates was an African-American gentleman that was one of the first African-Americans to work for the city of Atlanta. He was among the first officers that was promoted in Atlanta as an African-American. And so he started in the city of Atlanta in the 60s, which was a very, very divisive time.
Groundbreaking. Yeah.
He was a groundbreaker, yeah. And he was the guy that sat me down sometimes and said, Karen, you just don't want to do that. You know, he was the guy that talked to me about picking your battles, and talked to me about, you know, you can't take the world on with this one. You kind of have to choose, pick, find the people that are going to help you get through this. Find the people that you can trust and listen to them. You know, don't listen to all that background noise. You know, focus on the ones that want to help you succeed.
What do you think he saw in you?
I was 26, and so I was a little bit more mature, and I really, you know, I don't know how everybody else does it, but I typically try to read a room. I try to read the environment, and I think that was it. I kind of sat back and read the environment, and I didn't take on every fight that came my way. I took on some that I lost. I took on some I shouldn't have. I knew that, but I took on some that I shouldn't have. But I didn't take every one. I really did try to heed his advice. I was a little bit more mature than I think, you know, just by life experience. I was a little bit more mature, and I think he probably appreciated that.
So, you know, when I look at your resume, I mean, you just went right up that ladder. You just went up, made your way literally through all the different steps to end up on the operations side. I mean, you started on the, what would you call that, the field side, as it were.
Right.
And then...
Well, so the fire department, that's what anything that you do in the field is operations.
Okay.
And so that's one of the things about being a woman in the fire service, is that a lot of you can take different paths. And if you want to be a fire chief, and I honestly didn't know I wanted to be a fire chief. So, you know, I was just doing this. I was doing it for a while. I was doing it to see how it worked out. If you want to be a fire chief, and you want to be viewed as a fire chief, and that has a certain connotation, being a fire chief, you have to, I think, and a lot of people think, because I'm very much a traditionalist in the fire service, I think you have to know operations. I think you have to do that steady march, because you learn something at every one of those steps. You learn something that's going to help you be successful at the next step. You learn something about personnel. You learn something about how to run a fire scene or how to run any emergency scene. You learn something about how the world works. So that is, from my perspective, you can't skip.
Right.
You don't skip in the fire service, because if you do, you lose your credibility. So.
Good point. As a woman, still one of few working your way up, were there any times when you felt a bias or discrimination?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
How'd you handle it?
I fought it sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes I would have the conversations about, this isn't right, this isn't fair, and then you'd have the conversation about, yeah, life's not always right or fair. You know, I worked sometimes in ways that I might not be proud of, to try to change it or to try to impact it. Sometimes I worked in ways that I'm extremely proud of to change it. But, you know, I think that that's a very individual It was circumstance, and it was how you responded to that circumstance. So you get a sense of this is not just. I think that's I think that's kind of where I go with it. Is
Right.
It's about this is not just, and that I think to me is the most offensive thing about it sometimes.
Yeah.
But the flip side of it is that as I worked my way through it, and as I learned more about what battles to take on, or I learned more about what I could impact, or the ways that I could make a difference, I also gained more respect. And so there is that piece that as the men that I worked with, as they saw me handle situations, either with, they respond to how I respond. And so if I try to respond with dignity, they respond back to me that way. If I responded as a, if I just went off, and I did it a couple of times, I didn't gain anything in their eyes. And so working through that system, and it wasn't that I had to gain it in everyone's eyes. That's also an important distinction. I had to have my touchstones. And so it was my touchstones I'd go to and say, okay, did I handle it right? What do you think about the way I worked through that? And I had some people that were very honest with me. I had a guy say, I worked with people sometimes. So you have such a rank structure in the fire service. And I remember when I was a lieutenant, which is the first time that you actually are an officer, had an engineer that was was an older guy that had been on the department for 30 years. And I did something one day that was just absolutely stupid about leading people. Because when you lead people, and especially as a woman leading men, that becomes even a little bit more complex, because you can't come off certain ways. You have to have, they talk about you have to have command presence. Well, what does that mean? That doesn't mean that you're screaming and yelling. That doesn't mean that you're berating. It means that you have to handle yourself with some, you have to be a little bit aloof. You have to be decisive, and you have to take responsibility for your actions. And I did something one day that was really stupid about handling people. And this engineer, he's a great guy. I mean, he was a wonderful man. And he just sat me down and he said, don't ever do that again. Don't ever let me see you do that again. It lessens you. So it's those sorts of things that people would give me.
But it's also you being receptive to it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that that's really important. Frequently when people give you feedback, it's not necessarily that you welcome that.
Right.
So you made your way up Fulton County, then how did the Oregon thing come into it? Here you were, comfortable, you were been there for a long time, you knew all the personalities, you knew the politics. What was it that made you stand up and cross the country and take another jump?
Fulton County, in 2004, the state of Georgia underwent a shift, a political shift, and most particularly the metro Atlanta area, because we had a Republican governor, and there was a switch in the House and Senate. We went to a very Republican-led legislature. That brought about the change of some laws in the state, and one of the things that Metro Atlanta is surrounded by a lot of small communities, and some of them in 2004 were unincorporated. Well, they had been fighting internally with the Fulton County commissioners for a long time about being able to form their own governments and form their own cities and their own services. In 2004, there was enough power finally behind the move to allow that to happen. And so what happened after that was from 2004 to 2007, there was a mass breakup of the unincorporated Fulton County areas.
Which were the areas that you served with
Correct.
the Fulton County Fire? Okay.
Yeah, and so those areas started incorporating. When they started incorporating as cities, they started forming their own fire departments. And so at one point I was working for an organization of 400 people, and within a very short time frame we were down to about less than 200 people, because they had been divided off. And so what that did to the structure of the organization was it narrowed it. And so the opportunity so I was a battalion chief at the time, which meant that I had about 7 companies, seven groups of 7 stations with probably 40 people that on a shift rotation, that was my crew. And the next step from that is a deputy chief's position, typically, where you start running an entire division of an organization. So the opportunities to become a deputy chief went away totally. And so I was pretty much stuck. I had 25 years in at the time, and I had been a battalion chief for about 5 years. And you know, I probably spent a little bit longer as a firefighter than the average, but you know, I did about 5-year stints at every other position I was in. And so it was getting time. I used to kid them about, you know, I can do this standing on my head, because I had a great crew. I had phenomenal firefighters that worked for me. I had great leaders and officers that worked for me. You know, we were a happy little family, but I wasn't being challenged. You know, I really was. I had reached a point that I really could do it standing on my head. I mean, it wasn't that I took my fire scenes that way, but it was working really well.
Well, it was your own version of the glass ceiling.
Yes, it was.
So Oregon, how did that? Did you go looking for that, or did they
Yes.
come and find you?
Well, both.
Okay.
Both. I applied at the Eugene. The city of Eugene was looking for a fire chief, and so as a battalion.
I have to intervene here. Atlanta. Okay, you all been to Atlanta. You know what we're talking. Big metropolitan area,
Huge.
lots of stuff. Huge.
Huge.
Eugene.
150,000.
Birkenstocks.
Yes.
Wheatgrass.
Yes.
Right?
Patchouli.
Patchouli.
Lots
There you
of
go.
it.
There you go.
Lots
That's
of it.
perfect. That's
Lots of
totally
it.
perfect. The
They-
Shakespeare
yeah.
Festival. Okay,
Yes,
right. Okay.
yeah.
I just want to set the scene as to the contrast.
Lots
here.
of hemp. Yes.
That's good. Yes.
Yeah. So I thought, you know what? I'll start looking for something and see if anything strikes my fancy. And so I was being really selective about where I looked. I looked in Colorado, and I looked in the Pacific Northwest, because I thought, you know what? I probably would do okay there. You know, my politics would be fine there, and so City of Eugene had gone out with a consultant for a fire chief, and as a battalion chief, it was a stretch, because you just you know, that's a big move to make, going from that. I'm running a company every third day, or I'm running a division every third day, to every single day you're running it. And I had done some other stuff while I was in Fulton. I had been a training chief for a while. I'd been a fire prevention chief for a while. I had done some other duties, but it was a stretch. But you know, I threw my hat in the ring, because I have the education, because I do have. I mean, when you have 25 years in the fire service, that's pretty significant. And so I went out there as one of 3 applicants, and one of the gentlemen that I interviewed against was a guy named Randy Groves, who's the current fire chief, and he was also at that time the deputy chief of operations for the city of Eugene. Been there for 28 years at that point. Incredibly nice man. So bright. That so he and I really, I mean, it was the strangest interview I've ever had, because this other applicant and I, every time there was a break between your section of the interview, we'd go back to the room and we'd be like, yeah, but what do you do about what do you know, and it was, I mean, we just had a natural affinity for one another almost immediately, and we just understood one another. So, you know, the interview went through, and we're done. I go back to Georgia, still going about my business, you know, thinking about it and thinking, you know, it was a good interview. I enjoyed it. I had a great time.
Yeah.
It was a great experience, because that's one of the things I've found about interviewing. The more you do it, the better you get. And the more you get the questions that are probably coming to you about what you're doing. And so you're increasing your chances of getting the job, because you're interviewing a lot. But you're selective. But you're selectively interviewing.
Right.
You don't interview everywhere. You interview selectively. So I come back, and a couple of days later, the city manager there calls me, and you know, really just a really nice man. And you know, he tells me, he breaks the news to me. He said, you know, He said, you did a great job. You were our #2 candidate. You know, we picked Randy because of this, this, and this. Here are the things that I think that if you would do these things, I think it would be phenomenal. He said, we're going to open up Randy's position. If you'd come back and interview for that, we'd really appreciate it.
Wow. And
so, you know, I said, you know what, I'll think about it. So let it go. And about 5 months later, 4 or 5 months later, Chief Groves called me and said, okay, I said, it's time. You know, I want you to come back and interview. He said, you know, we're going to do great together. We'll be awesome together. And, you know, so he was hiring, at that point in time, he was actually hiring 3 deputy chiefs. So he was hiring his direct staff. So I kind of thought about it, and I think the primary thing is, how does this look that I didn't get the job as fire chief, and I'm going to go back as deputy chief? What if I don't get that too? Man, that'd be really embarrassing. That'd be, oof, ooh. But you know, went, interviewed, and it was very interesting because he actually hired 2 women at the same time. He hired myself and another woman as the administrative EMS chief. That is about very similar to me, very similar history in the fire service. It was remarkable to work with her. You know, that's the one thing I will say, is that it was absolutely remarkable to work with somebody that had tracked their career almost identically to mine. I mean, almost identically. And probably one of, you know, of all the things I took out of it, I brought probably one of the best friends I could ever ask for.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. How long were you there?
5 years.
So at the end of 5 years, which was sort of your time frame for each of your steps.
Yeah.
I'm paying attention here.
It sounds like a plan, but it's not.
Well, we'll come back to that. So 5 years later, the position for the fire chief in Charleston comes open. Did you hear about it? Did we hear about you? How did that come about? Because I know there were 50 candidates for this job.
Well, the first time it came around, I read it and I said, nope, no interest, because they actually went through 2 separate application periods. I was sort of looking. I was in the process of looking for, you know, the next step. You know, I loved working for Randy Groves. I will tell anybody he was a tremendous mentor. He was he is a great friend, and you know, we still, you know, it's the text. Hey, look at this, you know. But you know, it was time. You know, I wanted to come home. I actually was homesick. I wanted to get out of the rain. It's horrible. It's horrible. I think I had a little bit of the seasonal affective stuff, because when it starts raining in September and it doesn't end until June, there's a problem. There's just, everything had mold and mildew on it. You know, every time you go out, you're wet. It doesn't rain downpour like it does here, but it's just a steady rain. So I was ready. I was ready to get closer to family, get back to my friends. So it was time. What
was the process like? Because I mean, I did Google, Karen. Of course, you Google who you're going to interview, right? And there was so much in the Charleston press about the fact that there were 50 candidates, and that it was a rather unusual selection procedure. That I guess when it got down to 6.
Right.
You were put in a situation where the press was present, and you want to talk a little bit about sort of how that whole thing came down?
Yeah, the top 4, I think.
Oh, 4, sorry.
Yeah, the top 4. Yeah, so the process was, first of all, there was an application and probably 12 pages of questions that you didn't just get to write a little bit, you had to write a lot. And they weren't the typical fire department questions, because the impact of the Sofa Superstore fire was very evident in the questions that you were answering about cultural change and any experiences you've had with that. And so so you did that first, and I actually had a battalion chief from not Eugene but Springfield, because that was also part of the time there was we merged 2 departments, and that was important in the process. We brought 2 fire departments together during that 5 years. So it was actually a battalion chief that I was working with from the other city that kind of pushed me into the process and said, "Hey, you want to go back home? This is an ideal opportunity, you know." And it was kind of like, "What are you trying to do here? You know, this
trying to move
the
potential
get out of here.
competition
Get out of here."
Yeah.
No, he was actually very interested in me getting closer to home because he knew that was my interest. And you know, another one that's a great friend. So I lost track.
We're going to get you down to the 4 candidates.
Okay.
But I want to ask you, because I think we're all interested because of, like you say, the Sofa Superstore fire and everything. What part of the interview process told you that this was going to be the right place for you?
You know, the South is so warm and welcoming. The Northwest was a very interesting place to work. You would never walk up to somebody and put your hand on them and just talk to them. Yeah, you're looking at me like I've lost my mind. And, you know, because we walk up to people and hug them and talk to them. You know, "Hey, baby, how are you doing?" You know, that was my entire career, was people walking up to me, hugging, and say, you know, "Man, it's good to see you, sweetie." Anything like that. You know, we're big on the honey sweeties and all of the bless your heart and all the endearments. And the Pacific Northwest is not like that. They're very businesslike, and anything of that nature, any display or, you know, gets you into a position where it's sort of like, "Ooh, no, you can't do that." So that becomes a little bit problematic when that's not my natural mode. You know, so it's part of the whole thing about coming home, coming to a very warm, welcoming environment. Part of the attraction, quite honestly. You don't often get an opportunity to work for somebody like Joe Riley. You know, I mean, across the nation, if, you know, Joe Riley is the icon of mayors in America. And, you know, even the mayor of Eugene, when she found out that I was interviewing here, was remarkably impressed because, oh my God, she'd worked for Joe Riley.
Wow.
Yeah, so, you know, that is a testament to Joe Riley, it's a testament to Charleston. But, you know, to have an opportunity to work for someone like him and to learn, you know, even what little I can take in from that, or what, you know, what lessons I can learn from that, I think was a huge draw for me. The historical, traditional nature of
Well, it's one of the oldest fire departments in the nation, right?
Yes, it is.
An old and historic fire department.
An old and historic fire department. Yeah, and I'm very traditional. I'm very much a fire department traditionalist.
When I first met Chief Brack, it was at a luncheon that was, I think it was the King Street Merchants or something, and I was really impressed because Greg Mullen, the police chief, came with her and was introducing you to everybody there, and I thought that's the way it should be. You know, not that it wasn't before, but I thought that was very, very collegiate of him. You know, to say,
absolutely.
you know, you're part of the team, and I'm basically endorsing you with these bubbas. And it was, pardon me, Frank, there were a lot of the good old boys there. But you know, I say that with love. You know that.
Yes, dear.
But to see Greg be that generous, you know, I thought that was really interesting. And I, you know, we've gotten you to Charleston, and I want to give you an opportunity before I sort of open it up to questions. When I heard you speak that first time, you shared some things with that group that I'd never heard before. You know, my idea of the fire department, the fire engine comes, the ladders go up, the hoses come out. But how come every time there's an accident, there's a fire truck? There's not a fire every time there's a car accident. So of course somebody asked Chief Brack that, and she was very patient and explained. So I want to give you that opportunity to tell us what the fire department really does.
Oh my gosh.
That we may not be truly aware of.
Okay, all right. I think if you don't take anything away from tonight other than this, we are the answer to any problem that you come up with, unless it has to do with a crime, unless it has to do with breaking the law. So any problem that you have, if it's that your water main breaks, you know, you're going to call the water department and the fire department. If you have a medical emergency, you're going to call the fire department and EMS, Charleston County or Berkeley County, depending on where you are in the city of Charleston. If you have a hazardous material spill, you're going to call the fire department. It's that we cover anything that you have. We cover any emergency that does not involve a crime. And so I will always tell anybody I ever meet, firefighters are some of the smartest people you'll ever meet, and they're some of the most creative people you'll ever meet. Because when you see some of the things they figure out how to do, it's remarkable. It is absolutely remarkable. And it's not about school, it is about practical knowledge of how the world works. They are unbelievable when it comes to practical knowledge of how the world works. So when you're a firefighter, it's chemistry, it's physics, it's anatomy, it's physiology, it's fire, it's water, it's hydraulics. You can go through any number of things, and then you have to have those relationships too. Mm-hmm. So,
but
yeah.
You also said something that I found very interesting, which is you are the first responders.
Yes, we are.
You know, you may be in an automobile accident, but it could be a while before that ambulance gets to you. But the fire department can be there first. And all firefighters are trained as EMTs?
Not all.
But most?
Most. Well,
you're working toward that.
We're working toward that. And so Post-Courier doing an article today, maybe, that we'll have over the weekend about a cardiac save. We've had 7 cardiac saves this year. And that is the direct result of the fire department gets there first. And we are a community resource. That's the piece, is that we are in your neighborhoods, and so we're the most available deployable resource. So you pick up the phone, you call 911, you start talking about the chest pain, and we're the first person that's going to get there. We can go ahead and stop that injury. We can go ahead and stop the trauma. We can intervene early. And then we turn it over to EMS. You
can keep somebody alive.
Yeah, so we've had 7 saves this year. That is in conjunction with Charleston County. Remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable for us. And it's a testament to the fact that our guys, they get there, they get to work, and they're doing good things. They're doing awesome things out there. So.
What do you think your biggest challenge is?
We need to build systems within the organization. The guys have I have one woman, so
in the whole fire department.
Yeah, I have one woman firefighter, so I'm recruiting. I'm actively recruiting. If we can, we have done a remarkable job since the Sofa Superstore. The organization has done a remarkable job of coming back from that and changing. Tremendous changes operationally for how they work. But that has come at a price, and the price is that you were not able, while you were making those necessary changes for firefighter safety, we have not been able to build the systems that support that. And so all of that stuff that's in the background, like training, we're still building those things. We're still building a fire marshal's office that can work on the code enforcement issues and the safety education and inspections and all of the things they do. So it really is about, the biggest challenge is about putting the systems in place.
Not the least of which would be dealing with all these old historic structures. You mentioned something about that before, the GPS systems. You have to know where an address is, and then you get there and it's an antebellum 4-story
balloon frame construction,
divided into 25 apartments, and you're trying to figure out where to go.
Right.
And I know that's a
and it's going to go back to the amount of things you have to know. They used to make them know territory. Now we do have computers that will get us there, but you should still know your territory. But knowing building construction, knowing knowing about systems, knowing about the systems within homes, commercial buildings, knowing how to ventilate a roof, knowing how to this city, and this is one of the things that I think is absolutely, for me, one of the scariest things about this is that you have one of these old structures catch on fire, and it's a tinderbox because the wood is dry, it's aged. The homes are beautiful, but they're going to burn like crazy, and so we've seen in a couple of situations where one's on fire, we burn down 3, and we're really working on, you know, and I think that's one of the things that historically about the Charleston Fire Department, very aggressive interior firefighting. Now the thing is very aggressive with firefighter safety in mind. So putting those systems in place that allow them to get in there and do it. But you know, it's the beauty of, you know, how do I justify my existence? I justify my existence because we help you. We want to help you drive this economic engine. You know, people come to Charleston for a reason. They come to Charleston to see these old historic homes and businesses and structures, and that's our job, is to protect that. That is absolutely our job. And so that becomes a I can't think about it too much.
Yeah, but I think that's a good place to stop, because I've never ever heard anyone tie it all together like that. The fact that you are contributing to the economic development of this community, and I think that is so important for all of us to understand that interrelation.